Hello there. Good afternoon from London, and good morning, good evening to everyone in the world. Thank you for joining us again with a Zoomed In Festival. So for those of you who aren't fed up with my face from seeing me over the last few weeks, I'm Luke O'Donovan, the Festival Director of Zoomed In. And today we're back with a couple of special events as part of the London Festival of Architecture digital programme. Just before we get into it, I want to thank all of you who supported our print sale in the last few weeks and helped us raise £11,643.88 for the Trussell Trust supporting food banks around the UK. So thank you everyone that's been generous enough to support that. And we're back today with a collaborator of mine, Francisco Hermanes, and we're putting on a couple of events to do with our exhibition called Power Structures, which we had intended to put on, in a physical space as part of the London Festival of Architecture this year, but now the world's turned our plans upside down, so we're on the internet instead. Francisco, do you want to say hi?
Hi to everyone. Big thanks to all our viewers. We're hoping that we have viewers from different parts of the world. Good afternoon in Europe, in Africa, from Asia as well. Good night, some parts. Good morning in the American continent. We know that we have a lot of viewers from Chile, so it's 9:30 there, so good morning. We have two very amazing guests today. We have Jana Sophia and Ibai Rigby. Jana is an artist and photographer from Germany. She will mainly be talking about her series Living Room, where she portrays the stark inequality in the city of San Francisco. And Ibai, he's a trained architect and urban planner, and he has worked with photography and filmmaking all along his career to document some critical urban issues around the world. So we maybe can start by yourselves introducing yourselves and what led you to photography. Jana, why don't you start?
Sure. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Luke and Francisco, for inviting me to this panel discussion. It's very exciting and a great chance to talk about this. I think it's a very important topic. So I'm a visual artist and photographer. I'm from Germany. I'm based in Berlin and partly in San Francisco. I studied first political science and anthropology, and later got a degree in photography at Ostkreuzschule für Fotografie in Berlin, Germany. And besides being a visual artist, I also work as an election observer with various international organizations. That's briefly about me.
And what about you, Ibai? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Luke and Francisco, for inviting me to this event. I'm trained as an architect, and I actually worked many years as a conservation architect first, and then as an architect for a foundation. So I was mostly doing conservation work of monuments in countries belonging to the Islamic world. So I've worked in India, in Syria, in Mali, Africa, in Egypt. And it was through this path that I was kind of unlearning what I learned, what architecture was about. Because the way we study architecture in the West is very specific. And whenever you leave what we call the Western world, architecture starts to be many, many different things. So I guess this combined with some, I've always enjoyed doing photography since my grandfather gave me an old camera when I was 9. It all combined, and I started thinking that, well, architecture is not only done in the drawing board, but it's also building the imaginaries of what we think architecture is. So that's maybe what took me to use photography also as a tool to create an architecture.
And you're currently the editor of Urban Next, yeah, a platform that you can maybe tell us a little bit more afterwards, but we invite everyone to visit the platform. It's actually like a visual atlas of the world, of different cities. So, okay. Luke, you're going to lead this part where Jana and Ibai can show us a little bit of their work.
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, the events today are about, in relation to the exhibition we curated called Power Structures, which is, playing off the LFA theme of power, and it's about how socioeconomic powers have shaped the built environment and the physical world that we live in. So we're kind of taking a little bit of a step outside of that today with a talk about informality in urban environments and how kind of where there's an absence of traditional city planning and kind of organized structures, how people have worked worked their own ideas into the environment that they live in. So we're going to start by sharing a couple of the images that photographers joining us today have made around these themes. So Ibai, do you want to talk about, I mean, you've traveled all over the world documenting different cities. Do you want to just kind of give us a little bit of a flavor of the sort of stuff you've been looking at and kind of, some of the highlights of that and what you've learned from it?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, are you, okay. Yeah. So when you first invited me for this event, the topic was clear. It was about informal settlements, and the word informal settlements actually comes from the economy world. No, it's the informal economy. So that those activities that go under the radar of the government are called informal. Right? Those activities that don't pay taxes, for example. And that was, in a way, was somehow borrowed by architects, no, to talk about informal architecture. And these two images are a little bit like the postcard of what informal architecture is. No, it's when we ask anyone, what do you think informal architecture is? Probably this is the first thing that comes to mind. No, so it's slums. And I say postcard because actually the photo in the left is a photo of it's a site in Mumbai in India, and it appears in the film Slumdog Millionaire. And now it's kind of a touristic spot, no? So there's a platform from which you have this view, no? And it's like the postcard, no? And well, the idea is but what else? I mean, this is what the idea we have. But informal also applies to buildings that use architects. So, for example, this is another. It's a different change, no? But from the previous slide to this one, it's so what's informal? It's not only the slums, but also where any building that is designed by an architect but doesn't have a legal status could be called informal, no? And you could even argue, for example, the photo in the right is this wall full of advertisements renting rooms, no? So even having an informal use of what will be a formal city could also be called informal, no? So informal actually it's a very strange and dangerous word because it can include many different ways. For planners in the West, in Western Europe, many American cities that are formal would be considered as informal, no? Because in urban laws in Houston, for example, are so lax that you could speak about an informal city there. When you can build your house in land that can easily get flood, which happens, and it's going to happen more and more, you could really argue, I mean, where is the real line between formal and informal?
And I think that's something that Jana, you address within your work, quite profoundly in your working. Some of the images we're showing, well, particularly from the richest places in the world, but you're looking at some of the poorest people within those cities, and then how they've had to kind of improvise the architecture that will be the places that they live, and kind of juxtaposing that with the wealth that's around them. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, of course. So I was from 2017 to 2018-19, I was working in San Francisco on this project, Living Room, where I'm exploring the growing contrast between rich and poor in the city. And when I first arrived in San Francisco, I was shocked and impressed at all kinds of emotions, seeing so many, as Ibai said, informal architecture. So many people living in makeshift structures, dwellings out on the sidewalk. And at the same time, San Francisco is one of the richest cities and most expensive cities in the US, where, yeah, it's a very good example for housing crisis, and where you can see the effects of gentrification. And I was looking for a visual concept where I can make this contrast visible on one image plane. So I had the idea to reconstruct temporary homeless shelters, to recreate them and to put them into wealthy people's living rooms for one day as an installation. And the results are 15 color photographs that show these reconstructions that I created. But for me, the project is not just a photography project. It is also involves, I would say, it's a multidisciplinary approach, and involves also a performative aspect where I bring in all the materials inside the living rooms of the wealthy participants, and I basically use their living room as a stage. And on the other hand, it's also, I feel this project has also a lot of parts of more or less ethnographic social science research, where my background in anthropology and political science also comes in. So yeah, and I, besides taking or creating these reconstructions inside the living rooms, I also took like images of so if you click to the next slide, maybe, I also took pictures of the original dwellings that I saw on the street. And with the permission of the unhoused individuals, I studied the different materials that people used. People informed me and told me where I can find similar materials. So I never took the original homes away of unhoused people, but I tried to find similar materials on the street, either by myself or together with unhoused participants. And then I carried inside the living rooms. So it was a kind of, yeah, very long-term project in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, something as photographers we have to be super mindful of, is that, you know, particularly in these kind of environments, you know, we're here kind of as, you know, an architectural minded discussion, but a lot of these stories, they're about people, and a lot of these, in this particular context, they're about some of the most vulnerable people in society. So what's the approach for how kind of you work with them in a way where, I mean, I guess it's collaborative to an extent, but you want to make sure that you're doing it in a respectful and dignified and productive as well, and useful way?
Yeah, for me, it was very important to be very transparent with all participants involved, whether wealthy or unhoused, housed or unhoused. I think also the difficulty as an artist is that there are lots of limitations. Like art I cannot solve the problem. I cannot solve the housing crisis. I cannot provide the individuals I worked with a new home. But I think a project like this can help to raise awareness. And I think I was trying to be very clear about my goals with this project and where it will be shown. And I tried to make sure that there's somehow a certain level of taking and giving back. So whatever, like I was always coming with food or water or also materials. It was kind of like, yeah, trading in a way also. So this was really important for me. But I think generally the biggest and also heartbreaking aspect of this project was for me to realize that whatever I do with art, it can be a contribution to change people's opinions and help to raise awareness and also to be a comment, but it cannot change the actual situation of the participants that were involved in the project.
Yeah, and we were talking to both of you before this event. Something we were speaking about with Ibai is how you've moved to America, but you've not lived there for most of your life, and something you've kind of picked up is how it applies to a lot of other countries as well. But there's a lot of skepticism about people that are taking photos, and a lot of hostility and from security, and kind of people are very self-aware of having their image captured. And I think, with Jana's work, it's evident how much of it is kind of based, how much of it is possible because of the generosity of the people that are allowing you to document their lives in such an intimate way. So, but I wanted to bring it back to you and say kind of about, I guess, how have you found that working in different cultures, the response to the photographer differs?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always difficult, the ethical point, like when you have the privilege of being a tourist, because at the end it's what you are when you're traveling abroad, and sometimes you can fall into the danger of pretending you can really do anything, and the reality is that there's very little you can do. So and many of my photographic work has been together with workshops with architecture students, where I'm trying to get architecture students out of their comfort zones and taking them to some of these slum areas or informal settlements, like for example this one, which this is in Kosovo. And it doesn't look informal, but actually it is informal. No? All this is rural area that has been occupied since Kosovo became independent in 2008. So in a way, there's many layers. No, it's the informality due to a lack of governments, the informality of claiming a land that is yours, but it's not really yours, because still today, countries like Spain don't accept the independence of Kosovo. So there are many layers, no, that go into it. So, and there's always a danger when you go there with students that you give too much hopes to the people. And it's true that a student's project or a photography project can bring visibility to the issues. It's still far away from solving the problem. No? And maybe if you go to the previous images, not this one, and for example, I wanted to combine, because this is what slums are, no? And in a way, I mean, there's positive things and very negative things, and there's one image that's missing, but where you see how, I mean, there's all the problems with water drainage and sanitation and etc. But the solution, for example, in India, if you go to the next slide, is to house all these people, take them away from those slum areas and put them in these concrete boxes that are normally outside the city. So these people before, maybe they were working as domestic workers in houses of more wealthy people, and their slums were close by, and now they live like miles, kilometers away from the places they work. And these situations, I mean, they're not much, I mean, and this is not the, I mean, it's happening everywhere, no? So sometimes the solutions to informal settlements are actually worse than the problem. I don't know.
There is one important, one point that I'm observing right now is that you both, your work and Jana's work, you both work with contrasts. Jana brought the homeless makeshift structures into the houses, so it's something that you don't naturally see in the street, in the city. You kind of work with that contrast that is naturally visible in the city. But you both somehow work with the quality of housing. So maybe you can expand a little bit more on that idea of living in the outskirts of the city, and what does it mean to live in a housing type or house that doesn't have maybe enough services or is not connected to the rest of the city. And what's the difference between being homeless and having those housing conditions where you don't have access to an adequate quality of life, maybe?
Mm-hmm. I don't know, shall I? I can start.
Ibai, maybe you can continue.
Me?
About that idea, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm for example, and I'll catch just to follow up on Jana's presentation, and I think what Luke was saying before. No? I moved to the US 5.5 years ago, and for me, what's very striking is how little empathetic society is, and I will argue that this has to do with the built environments, and Jana's work shows it very clearly. In a country where most of the people live in their suburban villas in the outskirts of the city, and their way of transportation is private transportation, is the car, you lose chances to meet people. Like if you live in a dense city like New York or London or Paris, I mean, you're continually encountering people that are different from you. The moment you live in your suburb and you drive your car to your office, when do you have the chance to meet someone that is not in your same social class, same ethnical group? And those encounters become very less spontaneous. So I think, and that work shows it very clearly. You know? It's and I think this is at the root of the problems we are seeing in America today. I mean, it's a complete schizophrenic society, and it's in part. I'm not blaming, but in part, I think it's due to the built environment.
And Jana, do you see those two worlds within the city of San Francisco, the world of the wealthy people and the world of the homeless people? Do they interact at all, or they are completely separate?
Well, yeah, I think San Francisco is a very, because it's almost like an island, it's very dense, and the architecture is quite narrow. So I was really focusing on the city itself, less the suburban areas. But I think I agree with Ibai about the fact that many homeless people told me their most challenging aspect for them is that they feel they are invisible to the other people around them, even though they are on the sidewalk and people are passing by. And especially in San Francisco, where you have the internet giants like Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, Google, and all these offices. And in this area where they have the offices are lots of encampments with homeless people on the sidewalks. So actually, I noticed the worlds are very densely enclosed together. However, the really wealthy people, as Ibai said, they are driving their cars, they're living in their mansions, Victorian mansions up on the hills, and the contact is less close. But I noticed that all the people who are working in the kind of tech world, Silicon Valley world, inside the city, in the city center, there's a direct contact. And so I noticed that there is a lot of fear and anxiety from both sides. The unhoused and the housed people were telling me that they were, I did not plan that in the project period they would directly interact, but I noticed a strong feeling of aversion against each other. And I think my hope with the project was that it makes especially those people more aware who are privileged, who are housed. And because I think we are really people who live in San Francisco, but not just in San Francisco, also in other American cities, or also in Europe, where housing and homelessness becomes a bigger issue, become used to this image, and then it becomes invisible. And we are also used to see good portraits of homeless, of unhoused people. So for me, I think the concept itself is also about space and the privilege of space in this inside-outside aspect, and also the aspect of, I noticed that if you're homeless in whether it's San Francisco or whether it's Berlin or whether it's London, you don't have the privilege that wherever you put up your tent, you can stay for some hours. You always have to be on the run, and you have to build your structure. In best case, it is built on a platform, or you have something that you can roll. That's why everyone has shopping carts or some kind of something to roll. So for me, this was a very something that I found very interesting, that the aspect of feeling secure in one space, it doesn't exist if you're unhoused. And in my project, I feel I worked like a mediator between both worlds, because when I went into the living rooms visiting the wealthy participants of the projects, I don't know whether it's the first time, but they were genuinely interested in hearing about my experiences on the street. And I do hope that through this project, it opens up people's hearts and minds for an informed decision. And maybe also, especially for those who are used to this image of homelessness in the city.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you were saying, Ibai, before about this idea of different definitions of informality in the world, but in the context of the London Festival of Architecture on the power theme, I guess the kind of informality that you both portray and work with is the kind of informality of the powerless and not the powerful. And in that context, and this is a question for you both, do you think there might be any informal responses that government should encourage more for people to do? So, for example, homeless is one aspect of it, but Ibai, that you have seen some slums or some areas in the outskirts of the city. Do you think that some informal answers to housing in those areas should be encouraged as well?
Yeah, I mean, these are debates that have been going for long already. I think it was in the 70s when John Turner published his book, Housing for the People, in which he was completely against building social housing for the poor, but rather preferred to give to the poor materials and money so they could build their own houses the way they wanted. Because the point in the late 70s was that social housing, more or less everywhere around the world, was a failure. You know, whether some slums, provided with some improvements like water sanitation, electricity, and materials, would be much better places to live. And there are many things. I mean, it's a very, we cannot speak about informal housing and make it a recipe, the same recipe for every city in the world. I mean, even in the US, probably each city has a different culture and needs a different kind of solution. But I would argue that there are many good things about informality. One is, for example, the idea that instead of having to save a lot of money before you can buy an apartment or a house that is already built by someone else, with informal housing, you can just invest all the money you have in building a small shed. And when you have more money, you keep building on that shed. You know? So in a way, it makes you independent from all the financial structures that push you into debt and make you a slave of the system. Whether, like, by building yourself your informal house, you can gradually just, all the money you have goes into the materials of your building. It doesn't go into improving the country.
But I guess in that equation, the problem is the land. And as you were saying, Jana, all the makeshift structures that you photograph and reconstruct in living rooms, they are built in such a way that they can move them pretty quickly?
Well, some and some not, but many participants I talked to told me that they are, if possible, and if their materials won't get stolen, they try to build it on platforms with wheels or using some sort of other means of transportation that they can basically put all their belongings into one cart and roll it and then build it up again. But regarding your questions, I feel, or I became a witness of one project. It's called Transitional Housing, where I met a street in San Francisco where an encampment was homeless, unhoused people, where they were moving into boxes on wheels. And this was supported by an organization also. And there were a lot of discussions between the organization and the city of San Francisco, whether they get an official space in the city where they are allowed to put their boxes on wheels. So this was, I think, an interesting discussion, because at the end, there was this question: to what extent will it really help the homeless, or because it's a political decision, obviously, and at the end, the ideal solution is that everyone gets real housing and doesn't end up living in a box on wheels. So until today, this discussion isn't really solved, but I feel I noticed that for me, it's about human dignity, and I think the city can do a lot that people in the situation itself feel a little bit better and have a better life, even though it won't be for permanent. But I think the constant stress of moving around from one spot to the other is destroying people. And so I would definitely say that kind of these informal responses should be also more legalized or more supported by politics before there is a long-term solution being found.
Yeah. Well, what solutions is San Francisco taking right now for that homeless problem? So do they have any social housing buildings?
Well, they do, but they don't have. Sorry,
could I jump in and actually kind of reframe that question and say, okay, what are the solutions that the people on the ground you're talking to want, rather than what are the authorities trying to impose? What do the people, I mean, to both of you, that you're encountering actually want as a solution?
Well, I mean, I will a little bit go back to the idea. I mean, what makes these people homeless? And is homelessness a status that, I mean, is perpetual? Are homeless people supposed to be perpetually homeless? And again, we cannot put everybody that is living an informal life into the same box. No? For example, in the US, there's people that have been homeless all their lives because they were born out of homeless families. And there's people that had a normal life, and for any reason, they had a disease, they couldn't pay the bills, whatever, they find themselves not having that normal life anymore. And some may be homeless for a couple of years and then go back into track, and some will never do it back to the normal way, conventional way. Then we have, I mean, Europe is full of homelessness, but it's a different kind of homelessness. Or the majority of the homeless people right now are all the refugees that are coming from war zones like Syria or Afghanistan or Africa, no? Many countries in Africa. So so what are the solutions? And the solutions are probably not the same for those local homeless than for refugees, for example, which have the biggest homeless sites in Europe that come to mind are like the campsites in Calais in North France of people that are willing to move to the UK. So we had to look back at those issues before we come with a solution. Then another, and just maybe it's a big leap, but for example, when the fires in California made, in a way, homeless people that were actually wealthy and rich and they had the beautiful houses, but they were all burned to ground, and these people became homeless in a way. I mean, they have money to rent an apartment somewhere else, but all their belongings, everything disappeared. So in a way, they were also homeless. No? And I think we are going to see more cases of homelessness, different kinds. I mean, it's not the same being homeless without a penny in your pocket, But the idea that you build a house and that's going to last forever probably is not going to last longer. And for many reasons, let's say climate change, floods, we are seeing that we are all in a way pushed into a kind of homelessness. And I don't want to banalize the word, but the society as it's turning, crisis after crisis, we all had to move because of work reasons, or because our area got flooded, or because our area became too dangerous because of whatever reason. So in a way, homelessness is a trend, a bad trend or a good trend. Maybe it's good that we are humans. I mean, humans were for 200,000 years nomads, no? And it's only in the last couple thousand of years that we are really settling, and that the majority of us is living in cities. So I mean, that may be a too philosophical question, but I leave it there.
But it's interesting the points that you're raising, Ibai, and I think that question of, it almost seems like a formal response to all of the homeless people. There's not enough resources to have that. So a way of tackling the problem would be to people to provide their own solutions. And back in Chile, from where I am, for example, a lot of people living in shantytown, they're not always, their first choice is not always to be moved to permanent housing, because they already have their communities. They're already started to strengthen the ties in the community, and they have their organizations. And then if you're moved somewhere else, you lose all of that, and you're kind of dropped somewhere which might not be ideal for you. Can you let us know, Jana, what did you observe? And maybe coming back to photography, how do you cover that through photography, the ties in the community and the ties of the people within them and their organizations?
Throughout this project, I learned from many homeless, unhoused participants that definitely their social network and their relationships they build up on the street also has an impact, of course, on the question whether they want to be housed or not, or whether they want to be moved to totally different areas or shelters. And there's this transitional housing or shelters, like shelters for men and women and different kind of groups where unhoused people can temporarily get housed, but there are not enough places, and the conditions, they are also rules, and many people don't agree with the rules. They have a different level of freedom also on the street. So I think the situation is extremely complex, and I don't think you can generalize. You can also really compare, as Ibai said, the situation with homelessness in San Francisco or the States with homelessness in Europe. I'm at the moment looking at homelessness in Berlin and in Paris and London, and the situation is very different because we have a different political system and we have a different social system. So I observed in San Francisco, there are only a few things that have to come together that lead into homelessness. So I met artists living out on the street. I met people who are very well educated, who are unhoused, or who are temporarily living in their vans, in their cars, then we're living in tents, then back in cars. So I learned that it's a very, very complex situation. And I think it is so closely linked with the political system and with the economy and the political system that there's not one solution. And I feel with the current political climate and also the global pandemic, the question of having a home and having a safe place becomes even more important. But it also might bring more and more people into more difficult situations where people are under the threat of being homeless.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right that it's very, very complex. topic, but then what you're doing, or let me make it a question. Do you think that you can raise enough awareness through photography and art? What has been the response from people to your work?
I think it can contribute to raising awareness. The question is, what is enough? I mean, enough would, yeah, I think that's difficult to measure. This would mean really coming up with real solutions. But I think it is art and all artists to lever together, the collective effort of artists and institutions. Let's say just talking about the art institutions and artists, I think can make an effort to raise awareness about social political issues such as that I'm raising with this project. I noticed that wherever I exhibited the project or participated in discussions or also in conversations with the wealthy participants, that the images itself make people think, and I think it is it reminds. I think what I want is that people feel reminded that it can happen to every one of us. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think housing is not anymore as secure. Many people of us are constantly moving, or because of changing work situations. So yeah, but I do think it can contribute. Art can contribute, but it cannot solve, unfortunately, the individual situations.
Yeah, maybe this is a good moment to mention that you're going to publish a book very soon. Well, it's the second book of the series, right?
Yes, but this is right. Do you have it here? It is or yeah, they're on the screen too. So yeah, this is the kind of the book of the project that contains the 15 reconstructions, and also has an index part with portrays, handwritten notes by the unhoused participants in portrays. And I will publish this book with the Kerber Publishing House in July, and it will be available through my website.
That's amazing. So people can visit your website and then pre-order it there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the link to that's in the description. But I want to kind of draw off a point you said. You said at the end about kind of involving people whose lives are documenting. I want to kind of pull back the conversation to a remark, Francisco, that you made, saying that we don't always have the resources and finance to provide the solutions to these kind of problems. But I think that's, again, a point. I mean, of course, it will vary in circumstance of different countries and different cities. But a lot of people would argue that we do. I mean, we have money for tax breaks for multinationals. We have money for military spending. We have, again, we have in the world a massive amount of resource, but it's all about the political will, which dictates how we spend this. And maybe the work of artists is something that can kind of change minds and change a way that we think and prioritize, and governments think about this kind of stuff. But I think a big limitation of a lot of art, and I mean, you can apply it to this discussion as well, is that we're all outsiders looking in. So how can we involve more of the people that are directly affected by these issues and use photography and other platforms to amplify their voice?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll take this one. For example, when at the very beginning, when I was speaking about how can we really do architecture, and well, I went to architecture school. I had my degree in architecture, and we all think that the built environment is the consequence of an architect and his drawing board, like the genius. Now we have this romanticized version of the architect in a way of Ayn Rand's Horror of Rogue, the lonely, normally white man who is the genius, who comes with a solution for housing the people of the city. And that's the novel from the Fountainhead, but that's also applied to Le Corbusier, to many architects. And when you visit the world and you find that Europe, actually the exotic world is Western Europe. I mean, if there's a place that is exotic, it's probably the rich countries of Western Europe. because most of the people live in informal structures, and the other day we were commenting, I mean, only 4% of the built environments globally is signed by an architect. So how do we change that? Because I, as an architect, I believe that we can bring some improvements, but maybe those improvements are not in the form of a building, but in policies, in helping people build better their informal settlements. No? And probably, I don't know if this would apply to homeless, because that's a very complicated issue. No? But for poor countries that have to house a growing, explosive, growing population, they don't have the money, they don't have the credit to build social housing for all. And probably if they did, it wouldn't be the best idea, because probably it will involve the breaking up communities. So how can architects do a better job in doing small interventions, but that can really, small interventions with a big improvement, no? And without breaking the community links or the social links that people have with their environments. And so one way we thought about doing this is, like you were, Francisco, we have this platform, Urban Next, which is, it's like any other architectural platform, but we try to show projects that are just outside the canon, no? So some of my colleagues are more interested in really science fiction, futurist projects. I'm more interested in the social aspects. So I mean, it's a combination of editors looking for different kind of content, but trying to expand what we understand as architecture. No? And it's not that I hate nice buildings. I mean, I love beautiful, nicely done concrete buildings, but it's not enough. And that should be a minority of what architects do. So if through photography, through platforms, we can expand the imagination of architecture, I guess we can do something. We're not going to find solutions, but at least we will set something moving in a path towards a better world, I hope.
And also you said kind of the main question, I think, that it needs to be said is everything working well? Can we do something about it and maintain a critical view over different issues that are happening? And Jana, what's the kind of the future of the living room projects? Are you going to keep on working on that same series, or are you going to work on some other projects?
Yeah, I'm at the moment continue developing the concept and looking at cities such as Berlin, Paris, and London. But because as already said, the homelessness and the political context here is very different than, like, each country has its own dynamics and its own picture, and the architecture also of the improvised informal structures are very different. So at the moment I'm still in the research phase, but the plan is hopefully in a couple of years that I will have a book that has images from various cities where I'm continuing working on this series. But the end results might also change. I'm experimenting also with virtual reality, because I feel the actual aspect when I enter the private homes of the wealthy with the materials that represent the informal structures, the homes by the unhoused, that kind of both worlds are forcefully moved together, and that this is almost has a performative character, because the house owners are present and they are confronted with the reality from outside. Mm-hmm. And so I'm at the moment focusing also not just on photography, but also on these kind of performative aspects, and trying to continue developing the concept in this direction.
Have you ever exhibited one of the makeshift structures as part of an exhibition? Or are you
yes, in a similar way, I participated in a project with the San Francisco State University and the Santo Tirso Museum of International Sculpture in Portugal, where where artists were asked in San Francisco to use artifacts from the bus terminal in San Francisco and to combine them with modern artifacts. So I recreated another unhoused person's home with these old materials discarded in the past and new materials discarded in modern times to recreate another homeless home. And this, this structure has been, or is currently on display in Santo Tirso, Portugal, at the museum.
Well, that'll be, and it's have you photographed that as well? That installation in the museum. That's
right. I have. It has a very different. I think the special situation, or the, how do you say, the when I bring in the materials inside living rooms, then the living room becomes a stage, and the stage that represents the privileged house owners is juxtaposed to the to someone who is forced to use all kinds of materials to build some sort of shelter. So rich and poor is it's a juxtaposition between rich and poor. But when you bring in a structure that represents a home of an unhoused person, and you put this into basically a white cube, that's a very different situation. And also the contrast is missing. So I'm still not sure how I really feel about it. I think it is interesting, but there are also a lot of aspects to consider, which I realized. So,
That's part of the future kind of process of understanding the project. Oh, but that's great. We would love to go on there and see the installation. Must be.
Yeah, it is. Their installation images on the Santo Tirso Museum for International Sculpture. They have installation images on their website, and the exhibition is still on display until September 6th in Portugal, which is not far from Porto.
Yeah. And what about you, Ibai? What's your future plans with photography and filmmaking? What are your kind of the main idea that you are going to be working with?
Well, right now, since I guess I won't be traveling in the near future, I'm thinking more about infrastructure. I mean, seeing how this country is taking a libertarian turn and a kind of celebration of individualism, which is not possible without the very strong infrastructure this country has. No, I mean, I live in Austin, which is a kind of watered off. It's very sensible to water drought. So the water infrastructure is incredible, but it's not very visible. I mean, people give it for granted, no? So there's a lot of like water pipes, canals that are hidden out of sight, and that's something I'm looking into exploring and making relevant, no? Because it's a kind of political statement against this idea of individualism. I mean, this place wouldn't exist if there was not a common project of paying taxes and keeping this infrastructure alive. I mean, the only way to be a libertarian is to live in the conditions of a tribe in the Amazon forest. I mean, you cannot be a real libertarian watching TV, having frozen food in your fridge, and having a gun with powder that comes from I don't know where, with a phone that has minerals coming from the rest of the world. And the whole idea of libertarianism, as it's understood in the US, it's completely bullshit. So, and I think infrastructure is all this hidden infrastructure is a way to show that, well, I mean, we depend on all this. And actually the truth is that a couple of years ago, it was about to collapse. And it was the first time that the water dams reached a capacity, and if that happens again, they may collapse and it may be a complete disaster. So it also relates with topics of climate change, and because all this was designed for big events happening every 500 years, and now these events are happening every 100 years or every 50 years. So I think it's a topic that can bring a lot of questions, and and there's plenty of work I can do without traveling, which is probably going to be
Well,
determinant.
yeah, the new normal. Yeah.
Great. So I think yeah, we're almost an hour now. So thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Francisco, there's a couple of public questions.
Yeah, there is one for you, Ibai, from Marcela. She says, "What are the informal areas or settlements that you have, or settlements that have shocked you the most, and why?"
I will say, I mean, for example, I mean, from comparing informal settlements, no, and one of the first settlements I visited was in India, and India can be a very tough country because you have this very big contrast, no, between rich Indians that live better lives than we do in that many of us do in the West. I mean, full service, huge houses, fully serviced, and they're very poor, no? And then you have other countries like, I worked for a couple of years in Mali in Africa, and I mean, since everyone is poor, there's a kind of dignity, no, like, because everybody's in the same boat. So even the mayor of the town may be sharing a bigger house, but it's just a bigger house. It's not even a bigger house. It's just that he doesn't share it with more people. But I have to say, the most striking place I was in Madrid, in the Cañada Real, which is it's an old historic settlement that's been there, I mean, since the 15th century. There are tales telling how dangerous this place was, because it's Cañada Real. It's always related to drugs, to the gypsy community in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And I just visited that place after floods. So there were still cars that were just in the middle of I mean, they were just covered with mud. And it was very striking, no? Because you think, well, in a first world country, whatever that means, to find that situation was very shocking, no? And yeah, and that was shocking, probably because it came as a surprise, no?
Yeah, probably in the place that you didn't expect it to. See that.
And it was the conditions were really terrible. I mean, as terrible as you would find in any other typical country that you would relate to slum areas.
Yeah. We have another question from Male for you, Jana. She says, have you had feedback from the homeless people you have worked with about the final images you create in the living rooms, or with the owners of the living rooms? How does that conversation about contrasting worlds unfold?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was so whenever when I was done with one living room and had the final results, I went back to the unhoused participants and showed them my reconstruction of their home. Mm-hmm. And also they received the images. And I think many were actually surprised that I was able to get access to the living rooms, because I found more unhoused participants who were willing to participate than I found living rooms. So getting the access to the wealthy, nice, fancy living rooms was much more difficult than to find homeless people who were interested participating. And I think because many people on the street are making these experiences that people who are privileged or who have money or have nice homes are trying to keep a lot of distance to the unhoused population. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think they didn't expect that many didn't expect that I would actually be able to get access. So I think this was always for me a very touching and important moment to bring back the images to the participants and to show them the results. And I had an exhibition last year in San Francisco with Catherine Clark Gallery, and there were several participants coming also of the unhoused participants. And there was one case and he actually he was a little bit criticizing my reconstruction because he felt I missed, like, he said I needed 16 banana boxes and had to do it like this and this and this way, and there was something not quite right. So yeah, I like to have these kind of, it was almost kind of like closing the circle in a way.
Oh, that's really nice that everybody homeless and the owners of the living rooms have been able to see the exhibition. That must have been a really beautiful moment.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone, there were only few actually coming because yeah, it is also a privilege for someone who lives out on the street to go to a gallery and to leave. In the moment when you leave your belongings alone on the street, you take the risk to lose all your belongings. So this was something that was not easy to overcome for the exhibition, but there was a moment where several participants were able to meet in the gallery and to see the results.
Yeah, that must have been really, really nice. Great. So I think we are over an hour now. So do you have any final closing ideas that you would like to share?
No, I can just from my side say thank you. I really enjoyed being part of this panel discussion, and yeah.
It was really great to have you with us, Jana. And what about you, Ibai? Any closing ideas?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm probably too many to pack them up in a short phrase, but yeah, I mean, we have to stop thinking about these in terms of solutions, no, but in terms of actions and making people aware of things is already good. It's never going to be good enough, but we have to start doing something, no? And probably the work will be to bring also all the small subtleties, no, like homelessness, no. So that's a big package, no. But how can we break it into people, no? And how the stories of each of these homeless persons has an impact in the way they're living, and probably the solution is not going to be the same for all, and the same happens with cities in a large scale. You cannot. I mean, I have many friends and colleagues from Barcelona, and they have been exporting this Barcelona model of high density cities all across the world. And well, I mean, you have a pandemic, and your PR project doesn't work anymore. So we have to be very careful with
How
one solution fits all. Yeah,
absolutely.
That would be the main takeout.
And that's very related actually to our next panel discussion today. So we have at 5 p.m. UK time, 12 p.m. In Chile. I know that we're going to have a lot of viewers from Chile. We're going to have a panel discussion about called Facing the Unknown with Andres Velasco, Liane Hartley, Elena Monteiro, and chaired by Emma Peters. And one of the things they're going to be discussing is urban resilience, and how, from a political public policy perspective, how you can deal with cities and you can encourage cities to be more resilient. So that was a good way of linking the two events, Ibai. Thank you for that. And I guess thank you both for being with us today. We're going to leave the video live on YouTube. No, well, not live, but it's going to be in YouTube. And we're going to leave some links for people that wants to see more about Jana's work and about Ibai's work. And we're looking forward to see future work of you. And yeah, we'll be looking forward to see some new stuff.
Yeah, and I'd like to second that. Thanks. So yeah, I mean, thank you to Ibai and to Jana both for joining us. Links will be in the description to see more of what we're doing. And yeah, we'll be back at 5 p.m. So thanks to everyone that's been watching, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.